Hi everyone, Kevin C. back here with video number 2 of 2, following up on our visits to Berger and Vanderkamp, and I've added Kendrick vineyards as well. This is video number 2 of 2. Here are the topics, so you might pause and check out these. We covered vine balance and clones in video number 1, and I will cover the rest here today. Rootstocks. This handout came out in I believe in week 3. I handed this out, and I just wanted to point out again that this is a very helpful table, and especially to point out relative scion vigor. The scion is the fruiting part of the vine, the part that's on top that's grafted to the rootstocks. If you were selecting a rootstock for a high vigor site, you might want a lower vigor rootstock to keep the vigor of the vine from being out of control. You might select, for example, riparia, a low vigor rootstock. Here's another low rootstock, 1616C. Here is one low to medium, 3309. And notice that those low vigor rootstocks have Vitis riparia in them, just like the riparia rootstocks. So there are 3 main parents that we use. These are American species that are tolerant to phylloxera. So we use those to create our rootstocks, because the most important thing is we need tolerance to phylloxera. So the 3 main U.S. species, American species, are Vitis rupestris, Vitis riparia, and Vitis berlandieri. You can take Marilark's viticulture classes and learn more about these, and we also talk about these in Wine 3, the winemaking class. One more thing, the AXR story. We mentioned AXR in one of our visits. AXR was a rootstock produced by UC Davis that was touted as one of the greatest of all time. It was planted all over California. Unfortunately, it had some parentage of Vitis vinifera. Vitis vinifera is the species of grapevine that is most of the classic wine grapes that we use. So Cabernet, Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, those are all Vitis vinifera. The problem with Vitis vinifera is it originates in Europe, and there was no phylloxera in Europe until the 1800s. So Vitis vinifera is susceptible to being destroyed, eaten. The roots get destroyed and the vine dies. It's susceptible to vine death by phylloxera. So because AXR had some Vitis vinifera parentage, it ended up being susceptible to phylloxera, especially when phylloxera probably mutated a bit to be a slightly different form. So the bottom line is we planted AXR all over the state, and we had to pull it out and replant. That's the AXR story. There are the 3 main parent species of rootstocks. All right, let's talk about terroir. What is it? Well, American viticultural areas are intended to represent consistent wine styles that reflect the place in which they were grown, or reflect the terroir of a place. Now, this is debated a lot whether wines from Sonoma County actually reflect a sense of place or not. If you make a wine that's very, very ripe, you may not reflect the terroir of the place, because oftentimes high alcohol and big jammy fruit-forward wines don't reflect subtleties of a particular place. The high alcohol and the jammy fruit blows out any subtleties. So people debate how much these big wines reflect terroir, but a lot of people are working to reflect terroir. So when we think about terroir, we think about if 2 wines are made identically, are the soil and climate what causes the different flavors of the 2? In other words, the 2 wines would reflect different characteristics based on the site at which they were grown. So we translate terroir literally as native soil, but the definition is broader, includes climate and soil and the vineyard site, and probably the vineyard site and the viticultural practices. the vineyard plan. Remember that Ulysses Vanderkamp talked about whether he had an impact on terroir because of his viticultural practices and the fact that he knows every vine in his vineyard and he takes great care in growing those fantastic wine grapes. So maybe he has a role in this as well, but the human influence is largely debated. Oftentimes we think of terroir as being the characteristics of a growing site other than human influence, that the role of the human is to grow the grapes such that you reflect the characteristics of that site in the wine. Here's a good video. I'm not going to show you now. You can watch this separately. If you'd like to start at 2 minutes and 18 seconds and watch to about 4 minutes, I put this YouTube link on Moodle so you can find it there as well. It's a good discussion of terroir. So here's our debate. Are these two mutually exclusive, the big fruit-forward wines, or wines that reflect a subtle difference from place to place? And we talked a little bit about in pursuit of balance. This was mentioned at GAP's Crown, and when it was given the abbreviation IPOB. This is a group that started to try to focus more on reflecting terroir in Sonoma County wines rather than, or California wines, rather than big fruit forward wines. So if you want, check out their website. They've actually disbanded the group. They feel like they accomplished their goal, and they disbanded just a couple of months ago. But I assume their website is still out there. But here on this slide is some information. You can check this out. Assessing ripeness. Next topic. Ulysses Vanderkamp talked about this list of assessing ripeness, and Stuart Johnson at Kendrick reinforced a lot of these characters. So you can read this. I won't read it to you in the interest of a shorter video. Please pause, read these. These are some of the key characteristics that Ulysses Vanderkamp at least looks for in assessing ripeness, and many of these are characteristics that winemakers and vineyard managers elsewhere look for. Tannins. We talked about tannins a lot at Berger Vineyard. Greg LaFollette talked about green versus ripe tannins. He talked about taming the tannins at the Vanderkamp Vineyard, and the fact that Ulysses Vanderkamp, through his cultural practices and taming the vine vigor, really made the tannins less harsh. So where do the tannins come from? Well, tannins are a polyphenolic compound. And if you want more information about that, again, Wine 3 is a good class to take, and we talk about that in Wine 1, the introductory class as well. But polyphenolics are a big class of compounds that include a whole bunch of different types of, or classifications of compounds, but they're all polyphenolics. They're all characterized by having a chemical structure known as phenol. That's why the polyphenolics come from phenol. The tannins come from both the stems, from the seeds, from the juice, and from the skin. A lot of the color and tannin we get comes from the skin. We get some more bitter tannins or phenolics from the seeds. If we include stems in the fermentation, and remember at Kendrick, Stuart Johnson included stems, as long as they were brown, they'd hardened off and turned brown, and they tasted good. Remember, he said a lot of times they taste like tea, and he likes that in Pinot Noir. So he includes up to 100% of tea in his, talked about stems, wanting to have tannins that come in from the vineyard such that they can be polymerized and create soft tannins in the wine. Sometimes those polymers look something like this. You have anthocyanins, and that's a color molecule. So it's a colored phenolic compound. And then you have other phenolic compounds like epicatechin, and those can actually form kind of a stack of a polymer. So a polymer is just when we connect a whole bunch of subunits, individual subunits or individual molecules together. So this whole stack would be a polymer. And if the polyphenolics come in from the vineyard such that they can be polymerized in the winery, then we hope to do so, to make nice soft polymers that coat the inside of our mouth with that wonderful drying sensation we get from a red wine, but a drying sensation that's very fine, not very coarse. So polymers can often be capped by color molecules at each end and have a lot of these monomers such as epicatechin in the middle. So this is the type of thing we look for in skin contact. And if you go to part 3 of my winemaking basics video, we talked there about skin contact and a little bit about making nice fine tannins. And then finally, we talked about Berger de Villaine, the owner, proprietor, wine person in charge of Domaine de la Romani Conti. These are those $6,000 bottles of wine, though this price list from wine.com actually doesn't reflect $6,000. It actually reflects more than that for one of the wines, the wine from the vineyard Romani Conti. We talked about the Latache vineyard a little bit when we were at Vanderkamp Vineyards, because they have the Latache clone planted there. So here is the wine made from the Latache vineyard in Burgundy, and the winery is Domaine de la Romani Conti, and that's the one owned by Berger de Villaine, and he's the one for his California wine. His California wine is called HDV. It's a joint venture between the Hyde family and Berger de Villaine. Those grapes for that effort come from the Vanderkamp vineyard. There's a little bit about HDV in California. You can check that out. That's it. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the vineyard or the winery.